Alright, we got this 2002 Audi A6 2.7 turbo. We're gonna do a DIY on a timing belt job with the valve cover gaskets and the camshaft seals. So we'll take the wheels off. Alright, see, this guy is missing all the screws from the wheel liner, so we don't have to unbolt that. But if you're not missing them, you're gonna have to undo the screws over here and one over here. You gotta pull it aside so you could get in there. You see those 3 nuts over there? You gotta take them out. They're holding the bumper down. You gotta pull the bumper aside just a little bit to unclip it from the mounting bracket. You gotta do the same. Pull the wheel liner a little bit off, and then you can get to those nuts. Hey, relatively easy. And you do the same. You pull the bumper off. Don't yank in it too much, because you might crack the paint. You gotta pull the grills out. Got a couple of Allen bolts in there. This is an 8mm Allen bolt. You gotta pull it out in order to slide the bumper off. Same thing here. Be careful not to lose those bolts, they're pretty long. It's probably going to be pretty hard to find the replacement bolt. Now you gotta slide the bumper off. There's a headlight washer line inside. You gotta crimp it with something. These vice grips or a hose crimper to crimp the line so the washer fluid doesn't leak out. Be careful with the bumper, so don't scratch it. You gotta crimp it, and there's a little connector right next to it. You gotta disconnect that, then you gotta disconnect the horns and the fog lights. There you go, bumper's off. You gotta undo that little cover on the radiator so you could pull the power steering cooler off a little bit, or to put the radiator or condenser aside from the car so it's not in the way. Put the intercooler shrouds out, stack them all on top of the bumper because you might forget to put them back in, and it's gonna be a pain to take the bumper off again just for those little plastic things. Disconnect the high pressure switch for the AC. Unbolt the condenser brackets. Unbolt the power steering cooler. There's 2 bolts holding power steering cooler. Unbolt the fan. Put the fan aside. There's another bolt on the side over here for the power steering cooler. Don't forget that, you might break the brackets if you try to yank on the power steering cooler without unbolting it. Set the condenser aside. We usually hang it under a wheel well so we could bring the car up and down. Take the cooler line off. Set it aside. You're ready to take the front end off. There is 4 bolts on the radiator support arms on the right side. This one is missing over here. It should be in there. On the left side it's usually only 3 because the right side has the hook to tow the car. You have to take out only the T45 bolts. There's a little nut over here. This nut is holding the arm to the radiator support, so you don't have to take that out. There's two T30 bolts on the sides to unbolt the fender. Then another two over here on top of the red support. You gotta undo those two. Pull the rubber strip off. When you pull the front end off, make sure you don't pull it too hard so you don't damage the hood release cable. This is it over here. It's connected to the hood latch. Then we'll take the engine covers off. Set it all aside. And try to secure the red support. Take the rest of the two bolts out, and you could release the cable to the hood latch. Secure it somehow so it doesn't swap back and hit the fender. Now you could put the front end in the service position. Don't try to put too much, pull out just enough so you could get inside there. Next, you gotta drain the coolant. Usually what we do, there's a temperature switch at the radiator outlet down there. We take that temperature switch out and drain the coolant through there. This guy right there. Make sure you replace the O-ring when you do that. When you first take the sensor out, the coolant won't come out of there. You gotta loosen the coolant tank cap to let the air in. Then we're gonna take the charge pipes off, the throttle body boot. That would be a good idea to inspect the throttle body boot at the same time because they have a lot of problems with ripping. When you're taking the charge pipes off, you gotta loosen the clamps up on top and on bottom. There's bolts on the sides. You're gonna have to take that little bracket off, and after that you gotta be very careful because under this charge pipe, if you don't pull it out properly, you will break it. Now you gotta pull the hose first out of the intercooler, then slowly lift it up. See, there's a bracket over there. You gotta pull it straight upwards in order not to break that bracket. Take the hose off of the diverter valve. Usually pry it off with a 90-degree pick tool. It's easier and the hoses come out easier like that. You don't rip anything. Alright, the pipes are off. Now we have to take the fan clutch off. Use a special tool to counterhold the fan clutch. To loosen that big nut. As soon as you loosen the nut, they usually come out very easy. Be very careful. Do not drop the fan on the radiator like that. If it drops on the radiator, you might damage the radiator itself and it will be leaking. Now take a 17mm ratchet, put it in the belt tensioner, loosen the belt, take the belt off. We have a special holder for the power steering and the water pump holder to loosen the nut, the bolts. Alright, take the power steering wheel off. Now we're gonna have to take the fan clutch sprocket off. There's a trick to it. there's bolts under the wheel. You can't take the wheel off. You gotta take the bolts out through the holes in the wheel itself. You gotta see and look inside maybe to see if you could see the bolt. See, there's a 5mm bolt on top and there's another one on the bottom. You gotta put your Allen keys through there and loosen them. When you tighten them, be very careful. The 5mm bolts could snap very easily. You cannot replace it. You're gonna need the whole new sprocket. There's 2 bolts under the wheel, and there's 2 more bolts a little bit lower than the wheel. Right there. They 6mm. Be careful with those bolts too. If you strip it, you gotta clean it first, because if you strip it, it's gonna be a project to take them out. Make sure you put the Allen key all the way into the bolt, because if you don't, you will strip it. Especially the top one, you gotta be very careful with it, because there's not enough space to take it out. It's a big pain to take it out if you strip it. Alright, the bolts under the wheel, especially the 5mm bolt, it does not come out all the way until you loosen all the bolts, all the rest of the bolts on the clutch fan sprocket. Now we're gonna take the 10mm bolt out, 10mm Allen out of the accessory belt tensioner. Pull the tensioner off. Tensioner down. As you see, over there we got some coolant marks. Means it's either his thermostat housing or the water pump is leaking. Most likely the thermostat housing it is, because as I see over here, it's plastic and they usually crack after a while being in the car. We suggest replacing it with the aluminum ones from older 2.8 liters, like a 99 Passats, 98 Passats. You gotta clean all the bolts. And then you could take the there you go, you gotta take the covers off. Be careful not to break them, they're plastic, breaks easy. This is the thermostat housing that I was talking about, that we suggest using. This is the aluminum one. As you see, you can see the part number. Oh yeah. As I said, it comes from an older Volkswagen or Audi. There you go. This is the part. Oh yeah. So yeah, see, this one is kind of stripped. We're gonna use our bolt extractor tools to extract that one. Be careful not to bend the inner covers of the timing belt. There you go. Loosen the rest of the cover bolts, and you gotta support this bracket, the sprocket, because it might fall down and damage the radiator. So here you go. That's the timing belt open. So yeah, as you see, the thermostat housing, which is over here under the timing belt, it's plastic. When we're gonna take it out, I'm gonna show you where the problem is. And here you go, you could see it's been leaking, the coolant marks. Alright, so you gotta put the engine on the top dead center. There's a mark on the timing belt cover and on the crank wheel. We usually mark it with a white paint so it's easier visible, but we'll do that when we put it together. You gotta put the camshaft lock tool. It only goes in one way, so don't worry about that. If it aligns, you're fine. See, this one is right on the dot. Bottom one aligns, the top ones are fine. And you gotta loosen these sprockets and the camshafts. Loosen them and back them out a couple of turns, so you could take the sprockets off. You're gonna need a special puller for that. Here's a puller that we use to pull the cam sprockets off. It's very easy if you have that tool. If you don't, it sucks. You gotta pull it up, put it on, tighten it, and then you gotta pry the cam sprocket off. But when you do that, you gotta hold the bar down so it doesn't pop off. If it pops off, the camshaft will skip. Then you're gonna have to realign it again, and it turns into a little hassle. So just hold on the bar. See? It's off. As soon as you've done that, you could take the bar out. You're not gonna need it until you're gonna be putting it back together. Now we're gonna take the crankshaft pulley off. It has 8 6mm Allen bolts. Be careful not to strip those two. You gotta clean it out first. You gotta make sure you hammer the 6mm into the bolts all the way. It's really uncomfortable to take them out if you strip it, so you gotta make sure you put the Allen key all the way in. Usually take the old accessory belt, put it on the pulley. The belt is there not so you don't damage the grooves on the pulley. We have this giant channel locks that we use to hold the wheels. You gotta knock in the Allen key into each and every bolt on the crank pulley, because as I said before, if you strip that bolt, it's gonna be a big pain to take it out. One more thing, when you taking the bolts out of the crank pulley, make sure you don't turn the pulley itself. A couple of degrees each way, doesn't matter, but try not to turn it at all. Because your cam sprockets are loose, you don't want to turn the crankshaft while the cams are not spinning, are not synced with it. Now take out the crank pulley. It might be stuck in there, so you're gonna yank on it a little bit, but it's usually not that hard. Then you gotta take that cover off. You got 2 10mm bolts in there. Here you go. If the crankshaft turns a little bit when you're taking the pulley off, just a little bit, don't worry about it. You're gonna straighten it out when you're gonna be putting everything back in. You gotta take the hydraulic dampener off to loosen the belt so you can slide the belt off the pulleys. Make sure nobody goes inside the car and try to start it, because then you'll definitely have some damage. See, we loosened the camshafts before, and now they spin freely. Then you gotta take all the pulleys off, the timing belt idler roller and the tensioner roller, along with this lever over here. This is a timing belt tensioner lever. You really should replace all these parts while you're in there. You don't want to do the job and then a month later redo it again because you didn't replace this little guy over here.
Make sure the rubber piece.
Yep. Make sure all the pieces, there's a little rubber piece under the bolt, under the lever and the washer. Make sure you take them all out. There's two washers on the tensioner roller, one on top under the bolt, one on the bottom under the tensioner. Make sure you take both of them out. You see, there's two washers. Sometimes the washer on the bottom of the tensioner might get stuck to the block, and then you're gonna have a problem if you didn't take it out. Make sure this washer is out. Once you take everything off, you gotta clean it all out. That's what we usually do. So we clean everything out so it's clean, nice, and easy to work with. If I'd be you, I'd be doing the same thing. As we see over here, this guy's cam seals were leaking along with the valve cover gaskets, so we're gonna do that as well. So we'll take all the covers off. It's easier to wash them in the parts washer, not in the car, and you could wash under the covers, and it's much easier to do the valve cover gaskets when they're out. See, over here the cam adjuster gasket was leaking, so was the cam seal and the valve cover gasket. See, it's leaking over here. Now, to take the water pump out, you're gonna have to unbolt the power steering pump. You do not disconnect any hoses of the pump. You just unbolt it, because one of the bolts on the water pump is covered by the power steering pump bracket. So you gotta move it just a little bit. See over there, there's a bolt. You're gonna have to take that bolt out. There's three bolts holding the power steering pump. One over here, one on the other side, and one behind it. You're gonna need a long extension to take that bolt out. You could either use a long extension and go from the top, or if you have a long reach small ratchet, you could use that too. You could even lift that bolt in there so you don't have to struggle to put it back in. Just lift the pump up a little bit. And here's that bolt that I was talking about. Take all the bolts out of the water pump. Make sure you run on bolt. Any other parts, just the water pump itself. There's gotta be 9 bolts in there. Pull the water pump out. Somebody already changed it. They put silicone in there. Do not put any silicone on any of these parts. It will start leaking just because you put silicone in there. Well, as I said before, somebody already did the timing belt job on this car some time ago. They put silicone everywhere. You should not put any silicone in there. Take the clamps off the thermostat housing. Hoses connected to it. The thermostat housing has 3 bolts in it. 2 on top and 1 on the bottom, over there. Don't break it off when you're taking it out. See, this is the bad boy that was leaking. See how much silicone they put in there? They almost glued the thermostat. Now we're gonna take the thermostat out, we're gonna replace it, and now we're gonna clean everything out. Clean all this silicone off, the dirt, grease and everything else, so it's nice and clean. Okay, so here's our standard timing belt kit that we use all the time. Got the timing belt, Continental. Got the accessory belt. Got the idler roller. Got the thermostat. We got the dampener. Got the tensioner lever. We got original oil water pump. The reason we use original, we used to use the aftermarket metal and power pumps, Apple and Graph. We started encountering problems with the water pump started weak. After a while, couple months down the road, and this water pump is has a plastic impeller from a dealer. They do have a problem with plastic impellers, but they at least last 50-60,000 miles, no problem. So it's better off with this one because you don't have the possibility of it starting to leak after a couple of months. And then we got a bottle of coolant. Alright, for this customer, we're also doing the valve cover gaskets. So this is our regular set of valve covers. We use the dealer valve cover gaskets. It's the same as the water pumps. We noted that the aftermarket gaskets may start leaking after a while. Here's the cam adjuster gaskets with a little half moon rubber piece. We got 4 camshaft seals and 2 cam bore plugs. We usually glue the plugs in because we notice that they actually start leaking after a while too. So we don't use silicone, with a special Mercedes sealant. This is somewhat similar to silicone, but it's much better quality. So if you want, here's a part number for this Mercedes sealant. You can barely see this side. So you gotta remove the coolant tank, take all the engine covers off, take these clamps out. Alright, so you gotta take the clamps off the intake, unclip the mass airflow sensor, take it out, and then you could take the box out. You gotta disengage this PCV system over here on this cover. You gotta use a little screwdriver or a pick tool to pry the clips off. You gotta be very careful not to break the clips, because then this thing is not gonna stay on. For these clamps, we're gonna reuse them later, so we just pry them open with a little pick tool so they don't get damaged. We don't cut those clamps. We'll pry them open and then we're gonna tighten them with the clamp pliers back on, so it looks original afterwards. And this valve over here, you gotta kind of walk it off the pipe with something, prying it little by little. Very careful not to break it. If you break the clip, it will not stay on. You also have to walk the hoses of the white pipe. Okay, so you gotta take out those inlet pipes. Make sure when you do that so nothing falls inside that pipe. If it will, you're definitely gonna ruin your turbos. You go stack the shop rags in there to make sure nothing falls while working on the valve covers and gets the turbos destroyed. Got another one over there. You gotta pull the coil packs out, disconnect them. One's got a broken tap, so you gotta pry the other side very careful. Okay, so you gotta remove the secondary air injection hose from the combi valves and the pump. Be very careful not to break that hose, it's very fragile. Be very careful with it. Then, before you remove the valve covers, you gotta wash everything really good, so when you pop the valve covers off, you don't have anything going inside the motor. You gotta wash it off, blow it through, make sure none of the junk is around the valve covers when you're taking them out. Okay, so now you gotta remove the PCV hoses off the valve covers. Be very careful, pry them off first, and then make sure you don't break them. Take the N75 valve off, kind of put it to the side so it's not in the way. Same we do with the coil packs. There's a little trick over here. The combi valves hose connection right here. It will not let you take the valve cover out. So you have to take the bolts of the combi valve in order to have space to take the valve cover out. What we usually do is we take this top bolt off completely, this one over there, and then the bottom bolts we'll loosen enough so we could move the combi valve just enough to take the valve cover bolt off. See, this is one bolt for the combi valve, and there's another one on the bottom. There is another bolt right next to the combi valve, so be careful, watch where you are bolting, because you could unbolt this pipe over here. It's not really easy to get to, so watch out what you unbolting. We gotta wash it first because there's a lot of gunk in there. This little guy is what we use to unbolt the combi valves. Once again, as you see, this hose connection is right on top of the valve cover, so if you're gonna try to pull the valve cover off, you will break that connection off, and then you're gonna need a new combi valve. So you gotta take the combi valve off. Don't take the bottom bolts out so you don't have to unwind the gasket later on. Don't take them out all the way, just loosen them enough so you could move the combi valve away from the valve cover. The driver's side combi valve is okay, so you just have to take the hose off of it and maybe bend this vacuum pipe a little bit out of the way so you could take the camshaft position sensor off. Yeah, while you're doing the valve covers and everything else, you could also take a look at the secondary water pump, the electric one. It's down there deep inside. See, this guy's water pump is leaking, so he's gonna have to get that replaced as well. We're gonna have to get his okay on that, and we'll see if we're gonna do it or not. Okay, here you go. We loosened the bottom bolts and we took the top one out of the combi valve. See, now you could move it away, so just enough so you could pass the valve cover through. Now we're gonna pry the valve cover off. There you go, see? Just has enough space to go through. Got some gunk on the valve cover, gonna clean that off. Engine looks a bit dirty, nothing crazy, not too much sludge in there. Gotta remove the valve cover, the old valve cover gasket. Well, now we remove the camshaft position sensor on the passenger side. You gotta remove the trigger wheel. Make sure you put it on the right way like it was before when you're gonna be assembling back. You gotta hold the camshaft when you're loosening and tightening the cam position sensor because you don't want it to skip. Then you're gonna remove the cover over here. Gonna have to clean all this gunk that was in the channels off. Take the cam seals out, clean everything truly, you could put it back in. Know that intake camshaft has a little notch in it for the trigger wheel. Make sure when you put in the camshaft seal on, you don't rip the seal on that notch or damage the seal. So be careful when you're putting it on. I'd say start putting the seal on from the side of the notch. Like that, so you have the notch on it already. Cleaning this thing, make sure you clean all the old silicone out of the grooves for the valve cover gasket, and make sure to clean out all the channels for the oil on the bottom over here. A couple of channels, make sure those are clean when you're cleaning it out. Yeah, we use rubber seals, so those do not need any tool to put them on the camshaft. But if you're using plastic seals, like original ones, you're gonna have to put a little plastic sleeve on the camshaft in order not to stretch the seal. Here you go, see? You gotta make sure you put it on and it's not damaged when it's in there. You gotta put a very thin layer of silicone or sealing compound. We use that Mercedes stuff, so put on a very thin layer. Do not leave it like this. You gotta spread it evenly all over the whole part. Don't get it in the oil channels, and make sure it's very thin. You don't have to go all the way inside, you just could do the outside where it's actually sealing and put it on. Now you gotta put the bolts in. These are gotta be, all of them are gotta be torqued to 8 foot-pounds of torque, which is 10 Nm. We use this, we have a little preset torque ratchet. It's not really a ratchet, it's a torque wrench. And you gotta torque them all down. Make sure they all the same torque. Alright, the next thing, you have to compress the cam adjuster. You gotta be careful with that too. You gotta have a special tool to compress it. You could probably pick one up at ECS Tuning. It's like $30. Or you could get one when you order a cam adjuster. It's a simple tool. When you put it in, you gotta make sure you do not over tighten it, because you will break those lips off. These lips, if they're broken, you need a new cam adjuster. So what we do is, like, you put it in and bolt it in. As soon as it bottoms out, like this part over here bottoms out on the tensioner, you do not go any further. You just stop right there. Go easy on it. If it feels like it doesn't want to go any further, stop and check it. Once again, as soon as this step over here touches the tensioner, you're done. Or if you have enough slack. If you have enough slack, more than enough, we're gonna stop right there. Once again, you don't want to break that tensioner. You gotta take these 3 bolts out. There's another one over here on this side. You gotta take that one out, and then we gotta change the gasket. So we took all the bolts out of the tensioner. We're gonna raise the tensioner just a little bit and slide the gasket out of there. That you might have to turn the camshaft a little bit backwards to give it a little more slack. You also gotta pull that half-moon gasket out of there too. Right here. Make sure nothing gets dropped inside the motor. It will be a very bad idea to drop something inside. You gotta clean everything. You gotta clean the gasket sealing surfaces. The half-moon gasket goes in from inside, so you gotta slide that little half-moon gasket in there and wiggle it back and forth. Make sure they both sides are in and it's not kinked or anything like that. Then we'll put this little high-tech gasket sealer on the gasket itself. It's not a silicone, it's like a gasket glue type of thing. It's a spray-on thing. It never dries up all the way. It works great. You raise the tensioner a little bit, just enough so you could slide the gasket in. You slide it in. There's aligning pins on both holes, so you gotta make sure the gasket is aligned with the tensioner. You could see it through the both holes. If it is aligned, you could press on the tensioner, and it's gonna put the gasket onto those alignment pins. Once again, as I said, you gotta be very careful and pay attention. See, one of the alignment pins came out with the gasket. So here, in between the tensioner, you gotta make sure that doesn't happen in your car. If this pin is missing, or if it's gonna fall inside the motor, you're gonna be screwed. We'll pull it out with a magnet. Here you go. This little alignment pin, you have to put it back in. You could squeeze it. It has a little opening on the side, so you could squeeze it with the little pliers, like 90-degree needle nose. Will work fine. You squeeze it and put it back into the hole. You gotta take that cover off too. This cover is holding the cam bore plug in place, so you gotta take it off to take out the cam bore plug. Clean it, put the new cam bore plug in there, and put it back in. Here you go. Here's how the cover looks out of the car. The cam bore plug goes in here. Here's the old cam bore plug, and it was leaking too. So yeah, we took the gasket back out. Took that little alignment pin. If you squeeze it, as I said, it becomes smaller in diameter. So we'll put it into the gasket because it's kind of big pain to put her in there while everything is assembled. So we're gonna put her in with the gasket. So now we gotta be very careful to align it properly so it doesn't scratch any surfaces or damage anything else. As I said, there's 2 alignment pins on each tensioner. Make sure they both there when you put in the gasket in. If they're not there, you have to find them. Alright, so yeah, we'll bolted everything back in. You gotta torque it down.
10 Newton.
Make sure it's torqued properly. These parts you actually have to make sure it's torqued properly, and you'll be all set. So now we put a little bit of that Mercedes sealant onto the cam bore plug and getting ready to put it back in. Same here. You put a little bit, very thin layer. Do not put a lot of it in there because it might block the oil channels. Very thin layer. And you have to spread it all over the part, all over the sealing surface. Take excess of the sealant out. Don't leave it in there. If it gets inside, it might block something important. You gotta torque this thing down the same as all the other bolts in this area. 8 foot-pounds of torque. I'm gonna put the same high-tech sealer, gasket glue, spray glue on valve covers all over the place, all over the valve covers, gaskets. You gotta put a little bit of a silicone, or as we use that Mercedes sealant on that part of the gasket. Also, you have to put a little bit, not too much, just a little bit, on all the corners of the cylinder head. Now the valve cover gasket goes in. Make sure it's laying properly in all the spots where it's supposed to be, in all the grooves. Make sure it's not coming up, coming out, or twisted. You're gonna have to make sure that it's not sticking out anywhere when you put the valve cover in before you bolt it down too. And make sure it's straight and in all the grooves that it's supposed to be. Alright, so you put the valve cover on, make sure the gasket is straight and in all the grooves that it's supposed to be, everywhere in the front and the back. The sides will not come out, so don't worry about the sides. Make sure there's nothing got in between the valve cover, or none of the wires got in between the valve cover and the cylinder head, and you could bolt it down. Alright, so you torque down the valve cover, starting from the center, 2 bolts, same torque, 8 foot-pounds, or you could use adjustable drills. They have those impact drills that you could set the torque ratios on, and it's gonna be just as fine. For this video, is using a little torque wrench, or you could buy yourself one. It's a pretty good one. You don't have to adjust it. You don't have to put it back to 0. It's preset for the same torque. So here we go. We connect the PCV system back in. Now we tighten the 2 bottom bolts on the combi valve and put the top one in too. Bolt the combi valve back in. And the passenger side valve cover gasket is pretty much done. You just have to put the camshaft position sensor back in, and that's it. Alright, so we'll remove the other side valve cover. It's pretty much the same thing to do. It's just the tensioners and all of them are on the other side, and here the valve cover comes out without removing the combi valve, so you don't have to touch combi valve. This one comes out like that. The only thing, as I said before, you're gonna have to bend this pipe a little bit over so you could get to the bolts and take the camshaft position sensor off in order to change the cam seal. So yeah, we'll put that tool again on that other side tensioner. We also found a little present for this guy inside his motor. Looks like a ring from oil bottle, like that sealing ring. This is a nice tool Alex has over here. You put the camshaft over and then you put a vice grip on the camshaft so it doesn't spin backwards, and you don't have to hold it all the time. So you gotta make sure, remember to check on those pins. Alright, here's the tricky part on this side. This sensor doesn't really come out easy, so you gotta disconnect it and bolt it, and you gotta try to twist it and simultaneously trying to pull it out. So keep on twisting it and pulling it out. Twisting and pulling it out. Make sure you don't break the sensor inside. And you gotta hold the camshaft, loosen the trigger wheel, and the trigger wheel is out. There you go, now you got your cam plug and the cam seal. Be careful with the hose over here. It's a coolant hose. It goes down with the coolant jacket in the back. Or you're gonna be like this guy over here with a coolant leak. So yeah, once again, you gotta clean everything real good. So no oil. Once again, this seal goes onto the camshaft. Where the camshaft position sensor is, there is a notch. Remember not to damage the seal, and check it after you put it on. Make sure it's not kinked or ripped or anything like that. On the cam bore plug, you're all set. So yeah, once again, you gotta put a very thin layer of the sealant in there, spread it all over the part. It's ready to go back in. Check to make sure the cam bore plug is aligned, didn't fall out. You're good. Alright, so we'll put that half moon gasket in there. Then we'll spray the cam adjuster gasket to that sealant we use. Alright, once again, check out the gasket surfaces, make sure they're not pinched, make sure nothing is pinched between the walk cover and any gaskets, and then you could put it together. Alright, here we go. So we wash all the parts. We're about to assemble the timing belt back in. So here we go. Make the marks visible. This is OE marks. We're not putting our own marks in. We're just outlining the OE marks so we could see them more easily. As you see, we clean all the surfaces. Clean all the silicone off the sealing surfaces. There you go. Alright, so we'll put that sealant on our gasket. Ready to put the water pump in. Once again, we're using the original water pump due to aftermarket water pumps to start leaking. You gotta align all the bolts first. Do not tighten them before you make sure that the gasket is sitting properly. You put a thermostat in, there's a little vent on the thermostat. You see this little piece over here? On top, this is a vent valve. So make sure this thing is facing upwards. Put the O-ring on top of the thermostat, and you put the thermostat cover in. You put an aluminum one. The aluminum thermostat housing does not have that third bolt over there on the bottom, so you will only put 2 bolts in there. So while we were doing the valve cover gaskets, one of the camshaft slipped actually. See, it's turned now. That's gonna happen when it turns. It's not gonna bend the valves or anything like that. You're just gonna have to straighten it out in order for you to put the cam lock tool in there. So you could do it with the pliers or anything that comes handy to you. Just straighten it out, make sure it's somewhere around there. And later on, when you're gonna put the cam lock tool in there, you're definitely gonna put it straight. And now we could bolt the pump back on, the power steering pump. Remember the 2 bolts in the front and 1 on the back. You should always put the bolts in first. Don't tighten them. And when you have all the bolts in, you could tighten them all. So yeah, we got the water pump in, covers, camshaft sprockets, the thermostat. Now we're gonna put all the rollers in, the tensioners, and then the belt. Alright, we use the thread lock stick. It's better than the liquid one because the liquid one could get inside the tensioner and seize it up. So put a little bit in, don't put too much. If it gets somewhere where it shouldn't be, you might have a problem later on. Make sure to check every step that you do. Check and double check. Well, this guy's AC compressor is not feeling too good, but check all the pulleys on it, everywhere you could check while it's out. Now we'll put the timing belt in. Make sure it gets in all the teeth on the bottom on the crankshaft. We'll put the dampener in. You release the dampener now, and you gotta pre-tighten the belt so it's tight just like it's gonna be when you're gonna assemble everything back. Thread lock on the bolts for the cover. Then you put the camshaft lock tool on, and you could put a crank pulley on too. Both the crank pulley on. See, it's a little bit off. We're gonna tighten the pulley, and then we're gonna set it right on the mark and tighten the camshaft down. Always put the thread lock on the crankshaft pulley, because they do unbolt sometimes from vibration. Alright, so you make sure the camshaft lock bar is in place correctly all the way in. You align the crankshaft pulley top dead center, and now you can tighten the camshafts. Okay, so you gotta torque it down to 55 Nm or about 42 foot-pounds. Now we're gonna have to turn it to relations to make sure all our marks align properly. There you go, you see? Bottom mark is good. Cam lock went in nice and easy. Bottom mark is still right in the dot, so we're all good. So now we put all the covers back on. So now you put the clutch fan pulley and bracket on. Alright, now remember that 5mm hex bolt inside that pulley is very easy to snap. So be very careful, don't over tighten it. Just tighten it enough, don't overdo it. You snap it, you're gonna need a new one. The bolt is not replaceable, you gotta buy the whole thing. So be very careful with that. So we'll put the top covers on. There's a little trick to it. There's a couple of pins in that bracket. You gotta slide it from the side downward and make sure it gets in all the places it should be in. Yep. Boom. And we'll put the pulley back on. Now the tensioner. There's a pin on the other side of the tensioner, locating pin. You gotta make sure that you get it in the right spot. It only goes in one way. So now we'll put the charge pipes back in. Again, be careful with that little clip on the timing box cover. Try not to break it. Very, very careful. Slide the pipe in there. They're very easy to break. This is the clip I'm talking about. You put the bracket back on. Now we'll take the rags out of the intake pipes. Put a little bit of lubricant on the intake pipe so it goes in and doesn't damage the O-rings. There's an O-ring inside the pipe, right there. Tighten the clamps for the EVAP system. Put the other side pipe in too. Once again, not nice and easy. Don't force it in. Twist it, turn it, let it go in by itself. Don't forget to tighten up all the clamps that you loosen. Once again, putting those pipes in. Be careful not to break the little brackets in the bottom that hold them in. And make sure you got them in, because this thing is going to be rubbery on the fan if you don't put it in. So yeah, now we're going to put that sensor back in with a new O-ring. Put a little bit of lubricant in it so it doesn't get damaged when you're putting it in. Make sure to put the clip back in all the way and check it so it's in properly. There you go. If you take any of the radiator hoses off, make sure to put a little bit of lubricant inside. There's an O-ring inside. If you don't put it in, it's going to be a problem to pop it back in the radiator. If you don't pop it back all the way, It will pop off somewhere on the road. Now we'll put the front end back on and clip the radiator hose in. There's a very important thing. All the way on the bottom of the radiator support, there's several wires going through. There's a wire harness. If by any chance you loosen the wire harness and it's hanging out, you have to secure it because you will rub on the alternator, causing a major electrical problem, melting down the harness, going to the AC head unit. Okay, now we bolt the radiator support back on. Remember, this side is supposed to have 3 bolts, and the right side has 4. Well, this guy was missing one, so we're gonna have to find him another bolt. Make sure that wire for the AC pressure sensor doesn't get in between the radiator support and the body of the car. That might be a problem. There you go, we got all 4 bolts in there. When you tighten in the bolts, make sure you get them right in the spots where they were. There's going to be a mark left by the bolt when you take it. So align the radiator support back in the mark, so you don't have any problems with the body parts aligning when you put the bumper on. At this moment it would be a good idea to clean the radiator if it has any dirt, or like this guy has some garbage stuck to it. It would be a good idea to blow it through. Okay. Put the condenser back on. Try to clean off anything that's stuck to the condenser too. Connect the pressure sensor. We'll put the fan back on. The power steering cooler goes in next. Intercooler shrouds back in. By the time, if you wouldn't put it on the bumper, you'll probably forget to put them in. Alright, putting the bumper back in. Make sure you connect everything. Take the clamp off the hose. 2 people will be perfect to do that. Make sure you align the bumper with the bumper arms and slide it in. So you put those nuts back on.
Сами перевел.
You gotta make sure the bumper is aligned and then tighten it. Now we're gonna put the wheel liner back in. Make sure to bolt it. Put all the bolts in. Not like this guy had, missing 4 or 5 bolts. Now we'll put the wheels back on. We're gonna put the intake and we're all done. Don't forget to put the hood release cable in. Make sure it's in all the way. It's not gonna be in all the way. It pops off and then you're gonna have very fun times opening the hood. Secondary air injection hose. Be very careful with it, not to break it. This thing is very expensive. Make sure you clip those guys all the way in, otherwise you're gonna have a secondary air injection correct flow codes. Certain chicken joint. Gotta connect the fuel lines back. Alright, you put the intake back on, the old clamps, gotta tighten them, they're gonna look nice and original. There you go. When you put the airbox back in, make sure there's a O-ring at the airbox outlet where the mass airflow sensor goes into. Make sure that O-ring is there. It's like a gasket so no dust gets inside the intake. Alright, we'll put the coolant back in. You're gonna need a gallon of a full strength antifreeze. You gotta use G12, just like it says on the bottom over here. And a little bit under a gallon of water. That way it's gonna be properly mixed. Distilled water in there. And bleed the system. There's a bleeder right over there, to the right of a throttle body. A little bit deep down. You're gonna have to loosen that. It's a 5mm Allen. It's a 5mm Allen that you loosen to let the air out. You can hear the air escaping from there as soon as you loosen it. As soon as you see coolant coming out of there, you shouldn't have that much air in the system. which means after you drive a little bit, the rest of the air is gonna come out into the expansion tank. You see we're getting coolant coming out with air. You gotta wait until there's gonna be no air, just coolant coming out. That's it, that should be enough. Next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna put the covers on, and the timing belt job is complete. Just gonna have to start the car off, crank the heat on high, fans on high, and wait for the car to warm up. As soon as it warms up and you get nice and hot air coming out of the vents inside, you should be all set. Wipe everything off, and you're all done. Put that sticker on. Yeah, when we started up, it was misfiring a bit because we disconnected the fuel lines, pressurized the fuel system, now it's good. What we hear right now is the secondary air injection. The car runs fine. That's it. Here we go, the secondary air injection stopped working. So it's nice and smooth. But this guy is probably gonna need a secondary air injection pump real soon.